The selling of Metro as a commuter rail was relatively easy. Everyone liked the idea of getting cars off the road, especially someone else's car. Much more difficult to address the questions of what kind of development are we going to attract around each of these stations.
And in just about every jurisdiction, including Arlington, you had some protests of people saying, I like my neighborhood the way it is, I moved here because I like it the way it is, please don't change my neighborhood.
The decision to put Metro's Orange Line under Arlington's declining retail corridor was costly and, for some, traumatic.
Metro did have the effect of destroying a business base. I mean, things got worse before they got better.
The streets were all torn up. We didn't have the service yet. The cars were still coming through. It was just in that period of time when you're having the worst of it because of the construction and you haven't seen the changes and the benefits.
I think people looked at the greater good that this type of mass transit would bring, and it also offered an opportunity to do the type of planning that hadn't been done in Arlington up until that time. In other words, to make a conscious decision that growth is going here and not scattered.
Arlington's early planning for Metro was spearheaded by two far-sighted county board members, Joe Fisher and Joe Holy. In the early 70s, they initiated a long-range planning process to make the best use of the coming subway system. They pulled together a broad-based committee that included the business community, the civic federations, and others.
The other difference, I think, was that, and you can lay this, I think, at the door of Joe Holy, Joe Fisher, and the board at that time, that was the timing. By doing the planning as Metro was being constructed, I think we put ourselves in a much better position than other counties around.
Metro's coming, and some big decisions to be made, land use decisions, and we proposed to the county board that this planning committee be set up, which was called the Committee on the Long Range County Improvement Program.
There were people who were very active in voicing their fears.
Some people felt that the corridor needed to be redeveloped. Some people didn't feel that it needed to be redeveloped. I think that I was probably on the side of it didn't really need to be redeveloped.
They weren't saying no growth, they were saying slow growth.
The issue was not that we were against Metro. The issue was how much development did Metro generate, and is that beneficial?
And that's a dialogue that continues. But the point is that the focus of that dialogue was never lost.
We actually tried to think of all the impacts of development.
You've got to have sewer systems and highway systems. We had to buy hook and ladder, all new fire equipment to go to the high rises, and we show the crossover was probably 20 years before you got tax benefits because of all the upfront costs.
People doubted in those days that development would keep their taxes lower than they otherwise would have been. Our no-growth or slow-growth people became somewhat convinced.
It was acceptable because we understood the importance of the increase in the tax base that was, at least the potential increase in the tax base, which we have now learned has been very successful.
The corridors are the economic engines for Arlington, and if we did not have those economic engines and we wanted to have the mix of services and the quality of schools that we have, we would easily see a 10, 20, or 30% differential in the tax rate that we enjoy today. Because all these commercial buildings that you're looking at here, they're paying a significant portion of our tax base.
The other thing I think helps is when people all over Arlington start using the corridor. If they're going shopping in the corridor, if they're going to dinner in the corridor, and begin to get more familiar with the corridors, then suddenly it's part of Arlington. It's part of their place.
I can't imagine our neighborhood without Metro now.
We adopted a plan where around the Metro station you could have higher density, but we were going to try and preserve the single-family neighborhoods right and left. In
order to make sure that the proper development occurred in the proper place, we arrived at the bullseye concept.
What's the easy walking distance to Metro? And that gave us the quarter-mile bullseye around each station.
Once those basic bones were put in place, we went back and planned with the individual communities around those Metro stations to give the individual stations their own personality, their own stamp, and to address the issues of transition from the higher density to the neighborhoods.
Between every Metro station area, between each area, you'll see the heights go down somewhat. And from the station area to the residential neighborhood, you'll see tapering down as well. So in both directions, the highest point is likely to be right at the Metro station. And then in each direction from there, you will see, generally speaking, some lowering of the heights as you taper to a residential neighborhood. Oftentimes a townhouse development may be seen as a logical buffer between the single-family homes and the higher density uses.
It was definitely a response to the citizen groups and the Coalition on Optimum Growth.
We fought that battle. That was not an assumption back in '70. There was no assumption where those boundary lines were. There was no clear lines there.
The planners did not have infinite wisdom. The neighborhood didn't have infinite wisdom, but kind of with the clash and the compromise that the county board approved, a better thing came than the planning process had envisioned.
We discovered what was, with a site plan approval and a strong land use plan, we had the impetus for what has become known as the Arlington Way.
But at the core of the Arlington Way is really the involvement in the community in both the planning decisions that are made and in the operational decisions that are made by the county government. So there is a connection between people and the decision makers.
The notion was we tried to unite public purpose and private profit. And if you can successfully do that in anything, you've got a winner.
Huge numbers of community meetings.
The auditoriums were filled on those issues.
Even though it was a county-wide vision, the key questions really related to the transit corridors.
They were not trying to keep Arlington in a bottle. They were trying to rather provide a means for growth, what we now call smart growth.